Now, the federal budget is coming up on October 6. Joining me now to discuss this and the Victorian hotel quarantine inquiry is the Assistant Treasurer and Housing Minister, Michael Sukkar in Canberra. Michael, starting with, and you're actually in quarantine yourself with your family. You've been stuck there for 11 days already, so I hope you're surviving. Starting with the Victorian hotel quarantine inquiry, we heard Daniel Andrews' testimony on Friday. It has outraged so many people, particularly in Victoria. He ultimately said he didn't know whose decision it was to use the private security contractors. Do you think he's shirking responsibility here? Do you believe it's possible that a Premier doesn't know who made this decision?
Well, Sharri, great to be with you. Look, I think the point you make in your question is very good, and that is, do we have more answers now at the end of all of the evidence of this inquiry than we had at the beginning? And I think the answer is no, we don't have answers to really the fundamental questions that this inquiry, certainly the beginning, has sought to answer. Now, we'll wait for the final report, obviously, where we hope that the veracity of the evidence is tested and conclusions are made. But I think as a Victorian who has seen the economic devastation, the lives that have been lost, the families that are traumatised and devastated, the businesses and livelihoods that have been lost, having seen all that, the inquiry was important because hotel quarantine and the catastrophe associated with it has led to this second wave, and quite rightly, we need answers. I think now what is more concerning, it seems, to Victorians that I speak to is, sure, there was a disaster in hotel quarantine which has led to this second wave, but now at the end of all the evidence, after a litany of ministers and senior bureaucrats have been interviewed, we have a situation where a decision as critical as that is a decision that nobody seemingly in the government or bureaucracy or other agencies knew who was responsible for. I think that is even a more worrying thing, because what other significant and critical decisions are being made as we speak to deal with the pandemic, where lines of responsibility are unclear and the ultimate decision makers are unknown? I think that is almost a worse outcome, that you could have a situation where the decision as to the arrangements around hotel quarantining are decisions that no one can pinpoint either individual or collective responsibility. And I think that is the bigger worry for Victorians now.
Well, this is a really, really serious leadership issue, Michael Sukkar. Should the Premier resign over this?
Well, Sharri, in the end, that is a question for the Premier to reflect upon, and for commentators such as yourself. As a federal government minister, what we are trying to do is support Victoria and to lend a hand, particularly where there are inadequacies, to lend an even greater hand to try and help them, because in the end, our job is to try and help Victorians. But as I said, I think the bigger worry here is that at the end of all of the evidence, with the Premier, senior ministers being interviewed, senior bureaucrats, nobody was able to outline who was ultimately responsible for what is probably the most catastrophic decision in Victorian public policy history, and will certainly have the most catastrophic consequences. So I think that's even, as I say, and I don't want to harp on it, I think it's even more concerning than the initial question, than who made this fateful decision.
Yes. Now, I want to move on to the budget. It's on October 6. You've obviously been working on the budget document with the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. This was meant to be a document where we were going to be back in surplus. Instead, the government has said that it's prioritising jobs growth over budget repair, and has delayed any sort of move to work towards getting back into the black until unemployment is down to 6%. Have you got any modelling about when you expect this will occur?
Well, Sharri, as the Treasurer outlined in a speech this week, we are now looking at a two-step strategy. One is obviously recovery, focusing on recovery, which, as you rightly say, uses as a really important benchmark the level of employment in the economy, in this case unemployment being at or below 6%. And then, of course, once those benchmarks are achieved, and taking into account the full suite of circumstances in the economy at that time, looking at the recovery phase and to ensure that as a country, in a similar vein to the Howard government and in a similar vein to the work we did over 7 years of budget repair, building up our buffers again for any future economic shocks. All of those questions, though, around when we're likely to hit those benchmarks will be outlined in the budget papers. And look, in the end, what the objective of this budget is to create economic growth, create jobs, as the PM said yesterday, to increase aggregate demand in the economy. And if we do that, what we have seen throughout Australia's history is that obviously has long-term fiscal benefits for the budget. So you can't do one without the other. The recovery phase is where we are now, and then Australians can trust, as a coalition government and having done the hard work over 7 years to get the budget back to broad balance last year, that we will be in the position to go to that next phase of building up the buffers.
We almost have to go to break, but I just want to get to one more question. You've also announced that you're winding back responsible lending laws that were introduced in the wake of the Banking Royal Commission, which will allow people to borrow money to buy or invest in property more easily. It had become almost impossible for people to get a loan under the responsible lending laws. But are you now worried that this might swing into the other extreme, where, you know, some elements of the financial sector might aggressively try to sell debt to people who just can't afford it? You know, it's something Jim Chalmers has warned about, that people might fall into a debt trap.
Well, no, we're not concerned about that, because there are very strict rules in place imposed by APRA. And that is the unfortunate reality of the responsible lending laws, is that they are an additional layer on top of a framework that's already there. And again, Sharri, it's not in the interests of any bank to lend money to somebody who can't repay it. And the motivation for us in changing these responsible lending laws, as you say, is to make it faster and less burdensome for people to get the credit they need, either to buy a home or to buy a car, or indeed to support their small business. So these laws don't hurt banks. These laws, the responsible lending laws that we're getting rid of, they hurt everyday Australians, and that's why we're doing it. That's what motivates us. And in the end, the framework imposed by APRA is already very strict, Sharri, that I don't have a concern. What I am pleased about, and we will be seeking support from the Parliament on this, is that these changes will be an adrenaline shot in the arm of the economy just at the time when we need credit to be flowing.
Okay, Michael Sukkar, thank you very much for joining me, and good luck for your final few days in hotel quarantine.
Great to see you. Thanks, Sharri.